Hi everyone, I'm Giuseppe Paolo, and I'm going to present my recent work named TAME Agent Framework, that is directly inspired, as the name says, by the technological approach to mind everywhere from Professor Levin. Thanks for having me give this talk. And the point of this work is to develop a hierarchical approach to artificial intelligence. Why hierarchical? Well, first of all, because hierarchical systems are everywhere. From artificial systems like robotics, in which we have low-level controllers that are directed by middle-level controllers that select policies, to higher-level controllers for planning and human interaction and decision making, to wireless systems, for example, where we have a different kind of hierarchy, but in which we have access points, devices that connect to the internet through access points, in which each device wants to give the best performance possible to its user, where the access point instead has to provide good connection to all the devices. The access points then connect to a router, which at the same time it sends information to the ISP. So here is also a kind of hierarchy. But we also see these hierarchical systems in societies or human-generated communities. For example, in companies, we have low-level workers, then we have middle manager, upper management, up until the CEO. We see this in living beings as well, where at the lowest level we are organelles that put together form cells. These cells, they form tissues which form organs up until organisms. But we can also go further. These organisms, like human beings, form companies, as we just said, form families, societies, and so we see this kind of hierarchical organization almost everywhere around us. As Professor Levin discussed in his work, A Technological Approach to Mind Everywhere, we see hierarchical organization also in intelligence. In fact, as proposed by Professor Levin, as living beings are organized in hierarchical structure from cells up until ecosystem, each level of this hierarchy has cognition adequate to its own level of the environment. For example, cells are intelligent in themselves. They can survive very well in their environment they're in, and they can adapt to it. And this is a form of intelligence that is different from the one from organisms. We, humans or animals, we don't have the same kind of intelligence that cells have, but we're still intelligent. And so this goes up until the ecosystem. So we took inspiration from this work to for our work, and mainly we got inspired by four main key points. The first of all is the fact that in living beings there is collective intelligence. So each part is competent in itself, but the whole of the competent parts creates a competent organism or competent ecosystem that is intelligent in itself as well. So this means that there is multi-level cognition. So the cognition is present across all the ontological level of the hierarchy. And the way the levels control each other is not through direct control, but is through environmental steering. So this means that the higher level, they shape the lower level environment and problem space. So this lower level react to that and act accordingly. But there is no really a way in which the control signal is sent directly. As an example, if we decide to move our arm, we send signals to the muscle and the muscle moves, but the signals are sent to the cells, but we don't tell the cells explicitly to contract or relax, this is just done by changing the environment the cells are in through bioelectrical signals. So then this also leads to the presence of emergent goals, because the goal of the system arises from the interaction of all its parts. We get hungry because our cells are hungry, or because the whole system through the interaction needs more energy to function. So these main 4K points, environmental coupling, emergent objective, multi-scale intelligence, and adaptive hierarchical architecture, are very present in biological systems, but are basically absent or very seldom present in current AI systems. First of all, current AI systems, they're trained on static datasets very often, datasets that are externally curated by someone else. And once they're trained, these systems, they're fixed and their objectives are predefined by the designer. So they do not have their own emergent goals. They do not adapt very well to the environment. They're just trained and left there. And all of this is done through centralized processing. So everything is done centrally. There is no multi-scale distributed intelligence. And at the same time, everything is usually done through a monolithic architecture. Very often it's a huge neural network like LLM that has to try to process all the inputs is given and give a response to them in whatever setup it's put. So there is no really adaptation to the environment it's in a way that is close to what biological systems do. So from this realization, it came our question on how we can build AI systems that are more like biological systems. So this means how build AIs that act like hierarchical societies of agents rather than a single big monolithic thing, and how interaction between these societies or agents leads to the emergence of behaviors, and if this kind of emergence and interactions can allow us to learn more about how biological systems work. So from this, we developed TAG, the TAME agent framework. That is a framework for creating hierarchical multi-agent systems that follow TAME principles. So in this, you have one hierarchy, a hierarchical agent composed of multiple levels, in which in each level there is one sub-agent or multiple sub-agents that are connected among themselves. And then this hierarchical agent interacts with the environment it's in. And the principle it follows is the fact that there are distributed competencies. So each agent in the hierarchy, each sub-agent, solves problem at its own scale. So the agents on the bottom, they solve problem from the environment. The agents on the top, they solve more abstract problems, very, very similar to what happens in living beings, in living organisms, where cells have their own problems that are nutrition, fighting for survival, or among other cells. Then we have higher level beings that have to have different problems like socialization. We have to work with all these kind of things. At the same time, we have loose coupling between the agents. So very much like in living systems, we do not want direct controls between the agents. So we don't want the agent on top to tell directly to the agent below what to do. We just want them to interact by shaping each other observation and changing their own environment. And from this, we want emergence. So the whole system behavior has to emerge through the agent's interaction. So each agent does its own thing, and when put all together, the whole system handles the environment in the way we want. And the fourth principle is the fact that we have localization. So this means that each agent do not need to understand the whole system. It just need to understand its own local environment. So the cognitive codes of each agent are limited. This agent here on the bottom, it does not need to know what the the big goal is, what the whole system has to do. It just have to deal with its own level of abstraction. And all of this is possible thanks to an abstraction that we made. It's called level environment. Basically, this abstraction abstracts each level of the hierarchy as the environment of the agents above. And it does so by handling the cognitive code of each agent and handling the flows of informations from in the hierarchy, from the real environment of the bottom to the top of the hierarchy, going down. Now, before I explain in much more detail how this works and how this is done, I will give some background on reinforcement learning. This is because all of this is done by using the reinforcement learning formalization. So for the people that are not very familiar with it, I will just give a high level introduction to the concept and terminology of reinforcement learning. So we start with Markov decision processes that are a formalization of a control system. It's a very useful formalization. And it consists in a tuple of four values. The first of all is the state space. That is the space that describes the states in which the system can be. Then there is the action space. That is the state describing the actions that can be taken in the system. Then there is the transition function that very often is a probabilistic function that tells us if in a given state we perform a given action, in which state we end up next. And then we have the reward function that is what is used by the designer to define the goal that we want to achieve in the system. And it basically gives us a reward when given a state and performing an action, we end up in another state. Then sometimes we also define what is called an observation function, that is just a function that gives us a representation of the state. An example here, directly coming from the Wikipedia page of the Markov decision processes, we have a very simple system with three states, S0, S1, S2, in which we can perform two actions, A0 and A1. So if we are in S1, for example, we can perform A1, and with probability 0.95, we end up in S1. With probability 0.05, we end up in S2. Instead, if we perform A0, we have three different probabilities of ending up in different states. And by performing S0, we have 0.7 probability of ending up in S0, and plus we get a reward of plus 5. So this means that we go in the direction of the desired goal. Instead, if we were in S2 and we perform A1, we have a 0.3% probability to end up in S0, and in that case, we will get a reward of -1. So now, once we have formalized a control system through Markov decision processes, we can solve it through reinforcement learning. Reinforcement learning formalizes this as an agent acting on an environment. The environment is the Markov decision process. And the agent, what it does is observes the state of the environment and it performs actions on it. The way it performs action is through what is called a policy, that given the observation, it performs an action. And once the action is performed on the environment changes states through its own transition function and returns a new observation and a reward. So what the agent does is, with the new observation, it uses its policy to perform another action on the environment and at the same time collects the reward. And the goal of the agent here is to learn a policy that by performing actions depending on the observations, it maximizes the discounted sum of reward. So by maximizing this, the agent knows that it's moving towards the desired goal. And the way the policy is learned is by collecting multiple sample of tuples, observation, action, reward, next observation, and training on them. So this is basically what happens in reinforcement learning. Now, given this formalization, we can come back to the level environment. And as I was saying, the level environment allows us to abstract each level of our hierarchy as the environment or the agents above. And thanks to this, it allows the separation of the cognitive codes of each agent. So the agents of the very high level of the hierarchy, they don't know all the details of the environment, they just know about their neighborhood of cognition. Now, to go into more detail of how this works, I can show you in detail the flux of information that's for a level n, that happens in a level n. So this looks very complicated, but actually it's not. You will see in a very short time. So at each time step, as I was saying, there are two flows of information, one from the bottom that brings observation from the real environment, from each environment up to the top of the hierarchy, and one from the top to the bottom that brings the decisions that each agent does at its own level of cognition. So if we start from the upward flow of information, at the bottom of the hierarchy, we have the real environment. The real environment returns an observation. These observations are all concatenated and sent to each agent in a level, depending on which aspects of the environment each agent observes. And this happens with the reward as well. Now, when an agent in a level receives its observation, it sends a message to the level above, and this message is generated by what we define as a message function. This message function, what it does, it encodes the internal state of the agent, the observation that it received from the environment below, and the reward. It encodes them as a message that contains an abstracted representation of what the agent observes and leaves. So the collection of all the messages from the agents in a level basically constitutes the observation that this level sends to the agents above. And the same happens for the reward. So in this way, this level, the level L, acts as an environment returning an observation, and this observation consists of the concatenation of all the messages sent by this agent. Then once this flow of observations of messages reaches the top, then the agents start to act. So through their policy function, they take the observation received and they perform actions. So while in classic reinforcement learning, where you have flat structures, the agent acts just on the observation from the environment below. Here, each agent receives a modified observation. So basically, this modified observation that the policy of an agent uses to generate its action consists of the observation from the environment modified by the actions from above. So basically, this allows agents from the top to modify the observation of an agent, so the way an agent perceives the environment, so it can steer its behavior, but without direct control. As I was saying, this is very similar to what happens in biological systems where we don't tell cells exactly what to do. We just change their environment, their biochemical and bioelectrical environment. So the cells react to that with their own level of cognition. And this is what happens here as well. So this allows us to highlight the first key insight we have about tag is the fact that we have indirect control. So agents do not perform direct control on other agents, but just influence them by changing the way they perceive their environment. This is very good because it allows more flexibility and local autonomy. So each agent in the hierarchy can decide on its own what to do and how much follow the uh, instruction from the level above. It also makes it more robust to change if the environment around them should change and allows for emergent adaptation, which is not very present in direct control hierarchies where we have a much stricter control, a much stricter coupling, and many more point of failures. Then we also have, thanks to the level environment, locality. This is because, as I was saying before, each agent do not perceive each level, the agents in each level, they do not perceive levels too far. They do not perceive them directly, but they just perceive what the levels just below them and above them send. So this is also used during the training. In fact, during the execution, the agents also learn. So they learn which is the best policy to use depending on the observation they receive, and in which are the best messages to send to the level above. So basically, each agent in a level learns a policy function and a message function, and given and this happens only on local data, so only on the observations coming from the level below and modified by the actions from the level above, on the rewards and on their own actions. So there is no direct influence from agents too far away. So this allows to have very local cognitive cones, and this leads us to highlight the second key insight of our framework is the fact that the cognitive cones of each agent is limited. So no agent needs to understand the whole system. It just needs to understand its own neighborhood of cognition. And as a as this is very similar to how living beings work, because as we were saying before, we don't need to know exactly what happens to our cell. We just need to know one level below us that we can see it as our muscles, for example, or one level above us, for example, our family or the societal structure we're in. This allows for much better abstraction from both spatial abstraction. So I was saying we don't living beings and agents in tag, they just perceive their own neighborhood of space, but also temporal abstractions. This is because each level can act at its own temporality, very much like what happens again in living beings, because the way cells act, the speed at which cells act and live is very different from the one at which the whole organism acts and lives. And at the same time, another advantage of this local information in tag is the fact that we can have different types of subagents. So in this talk, in our experiment, we mainly used reinforcement learning agents, but actually, given that everything is decoupled and local, we could have PID-based agents, we could have finite state machine mixed with reinforcement learning or LLM agents. We could also have humans as part of the hierarchy. And all of this can be combined as long as each agent can act, so send actions in response to the observations that he sees and send messages above. So these are the only two requirements for an agent to be part of a tag hierarchy. So we tested our framework on two reinforcement learning environment. First one is a simple spread in which we have multiple disks, multiple color disks that are the agents in the environment that have to spread, so to cover these black dots. And so this requires a lot of coordination between the agents, because if they're not very well coordinated, they can all go towards the same dot, or they can get stuck, as in this video here, between two dots in a local minima. The second environment in which we tested it is balance, in which multiple agents represented by this purple disk have to push a platform up in which a ball resides that has to be as close as possible to the green goal. This also requires a lot of coordination because if one of them goes away, as happens in the video, the others have to stabilize the platform. And we tested multiple baselines for this. First of all, we tested a single monolithic agent that has to control all the agents in the environment at once. This is how it's usually done in classical reinforcement learning. In this case, we used PPO, a very standard reinforcement learning baseline. Then we tested multiple multi-agent baselines from the literature. First of all is MAPO, which is the multi-agent version of PPO, in which basically there are multiple agents controlling the agents in the environment, and these agents communicate between them. We also tested independent PPO, in which each agent in the environment is controlled by a PPO, reinforcement learning agent, in which no communication happens between the agents, so they are independent. Then we tested multiple 2-level and 3-level hierarchies based on tag. For the 2-level, we used 2 PPO, in which in each level there are PPO agents, or MAPO PPO, in which on the bottom level there are PPO agents, on the top level there is MAPO. We also tested 3-level hierarchies like this, and in both of these there is no learn message function. So this means that the way messages are sent to the between levels is not learned, but we just concatenated the messages. So we can see that we just concatenate the observations. So we can see that as a identity message function. But we also tested 3 PPO-com, in which the agents in each level learn a message function to encode their observations. And in this case, it's done by an autoencoder. An autoencoder that learns to compress the observations from an agent into a lower level, a lower dimensional representation, and sends that as its message. So we tested on both environments, and the nice thing is that what we found on both of them, but it's much more visible on simple spread, is that the higher up the deeper we go with the hierarchies, the better the performance of the agents get. Here they reach hand design heuristics, represented by this red dotted line, in which we just commanded the agents in the environment to spread by hand. And we can see that the only ones that reach it are the 3-level hierarchies, basically 3 PPO and 2 MAPO PPO. And even more interesting is that on the balance environment, while almost all the baselines that we tested reach good performances, the baselines that learn to communicate reaches much higher performances compared to the rest. So this means that the way communication is handled in the hierarchy is very important, and learning it can help a lot in certain situations. Then we wanted to study how useful for an agent in one level are the higher level suggestions. We analyze a tag 2 level hierarchy in which on simple spreads we have multiple agents on the bottom with one single agent on top. And for example, and we plotted the correlation between the actions from the agent on top and the action selected by the agent on the bottom. And we can see here, for example, that um, on the y-axis we have the action selected by the agent on bottom, this one here. And when the agent on top sends the action 4, the agent on the bottom tends to select action 4 as well. When, for example, when instead it sends action between 0 and 1, the agent on the bottom tends to select action between 2 and 3 at the beginning, and then the correlation changes. So this is very interesting because it means that the agents learn to um, use the information from the agents on top quite early in the training. As we can see, this correlation happens very early in the training, but it also changes with the during the learning process. And at the same time, to have a check if this was not just something given by randomness, we also studied how the actions from the agents on top sent to these agents are correlated to the action of these agents, and we can see that basically there is no correlation, there is no banding. So it means that the the correlation we see here on the top is basically given by something learned. So this is very interesting. Now, while uh, we've we've got some initial results that are very interesting, there are still many limitations that I want to discuss in this work. First of all, we have for now a very limited experimental section. We tested just on two very simple environments, and we just studied the performance of the agents, but there are many more ablation studies that would be very interesting on doing. I will be also very interesting on analyze uh, more advanced communication function and observation functions because for now, as I was saying, the communication function is either just the identity or just a simple autoencoder. And then for the environments, it would be very cool to test this on robotics environment, for example, in which we have one agent for joint of the robots that are then controlled by higher level with very deep hierarchies. And it would be also interesting to see how interaction between different sub-agents can happen. At the same time, we also have very static and hand-designed hierarchies, and it would be interesting to see how hierarchies can grow and adapt themselves to the environment, and how these adaptive hierarchies can respond to changing in environments. Also, as of now, we have a single interaction point with the real environment that is done by the level on the bottom, and would be much closer to real living system if we had interaction with the environment for each level at its own scale, because uh, in a living being, cells interact with their own environment, but also the living being itself interacts with the environment at its own level of abstraction. But this is much more complex because, as far as I know, we don't really have benchmarks that can do this. We need environments that are abstracted and hierarchical across multiple levels. So some new benchmarks need to be developed for this as well. Also, in tag hierarchies for now, we just have a vertical interaction, direct interaction between the agents. We do not have communication between agents on the same level. This is also something that is interesting to study. And finally, we have limited theoretical foundations and formulation of how multi-scale learning happens in a tag hierarchy. So it would be nice to develop formal framework to study how hierarchical adaptation happens. Also, the development of tag gave us gave rise to multiple open questions for us. Uh, First of all, is if we manage to develop hierarchies, tag hierarchies that are closer to biological system, what can we learn about biology? What can we learn about how biological living beings act and and develop? Also, there is the question if it's even possible to create artificial systems that look so similar to biological ones, and how these artificial systems will develop their own cognitive code, and if it's even possible that they can have morphogenesis like behaviors. But also more on the theoretical side, is it would be very interesting to see which kind of emergent behaviors happen in the inside of deeper hierarchies, and how the information integration is done and how it's learned in such deeper systems. So all of these are open questions on which I plan on working in the future. And if you're willing to collaborate, or if you're interested about this, do not hesitate to get in contact with me. You can find here a QR code to download the paper. There is also the code that is publicly available on my GitHub. And if you, as I was saying, if you're interested in collaborating or even just having a chat about this, you can find me here. There is the QR code that links to my personal website where you can find information on how to contact me. So this brings to the end of my talk. Thanks a lot. Thanks for having me here, giving me this opportunity. Uh, do not hesitate to get in contact with me if you want. Thanks.